Good afternoon, everyone. We're about to start, so if everyone can sit down. Thank you so much for coming back from lunch. We have a really, really exciting session on environmental justice, and I'm going to invite my colleague, Marielle, from Gaia to speak, and she has a wonderful panel of speakers. So I give the mic over to Marielle.
Thank you so much, Monica. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And first of all, our sincere gratitude to the GMI Secretariat, especially to Monica, that has made this event a reality. Thank you so much as well to the Global Methane Hub for their generous support, as always. I'm Marielle Villela. I'm the director of the Global Climate Program at Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. And today it's been my pleasure to moderate this exciting panel focusing on environmental justice and the methane reduction agenda in the waste sector. Today is the last day. We've been almost for 3 days talking about methane, and we've heard about data, about pledges, about finance, and now it's time, and I almost feel I have to say, at last but not least, it is really time that we talk about environmental justice and how do we intersect everything that we've heard in the last days on methane reduction in the waste sector with an environmental justice agenda. I'm very happy to be sharing the stage with these truly distinguished speakers, community leaders, zero waste practitioners, visionaries, independent waste and policy experts, and key people in the philanthropic world that I will introduce in a minute. And first of all, I'd like to take the chance to frame a bit our conversation and elaborate a little bit more on what we mean when we talk about environmental justice for fast action on waste and methane. Just for those that don't know us, a bit of background about Gaia. Gaia is a global network of grassroots and national organizations working in 92 countries around the world, focusing on working on waste and justice. And one of our main strategic priorities in the coming years is to support organizing and policy work for methane reduction. And many of our members have been working on pollution and on solutions to methane pollution for a long time, implementing composting, biogas, and other zero waste solutions. So for us, we see the momentum that we've seen with the methane reduction agenda since the Global Methane Pledge was launched. We've seen this as a real positive game changer. And we truly believe that we are in front of a huge opportunity to advance climate mitigation and adaptation in the waste sector. And yet the question still remains, how can we ensure a fair, just implementation? We know that environmental justice will not happen by default because of the barriers that we are all familiar with, the lack of a strategy, the lack of failure to issues of justice. If communities already impacted negatively by inequalities in society are not prioritized by policymakers and by all of us, they risk really becoming further marginalized and disenfranchised. And the need is greater than ever. Like, we cannot afford to only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, only reduce methane. We are facing several crises as a global community, and they really truly call us to implement solutions that reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and improve air quality, improve jobs, improve food security, improve governance, etc., etc. So what we have done, we have developed environmental justice principles for fast action on methane in the waste sector with leaders from 41 countries, a process that we've done over the course of the last year. And we're inviting other organizations and all of you here to join us in putting these principles into action. In Gaia, we work with groups in more than 50 countries that are poised for action, and we aim to bring technical and financial support for them. So our environmental justice principles provide guidance for policymakers in developing methane reduction policies, including a checklist to assist governments that are reviewing and improving their NDCs that, as we all know, they're committed to improve and raise the ambition of the NDCs by 2025. I'm going to go through the key principles just very briefly. I invite you all to go to the website and look at this really wonderful document in detail. But just to give you like the brief introduction to them, these are 5 principles. And starting with the first, which is respect planetary boundaries and to ensure intergenerational equity. The first principle talks about the importance of prioritizing upstream solutions in the waste hierarchy and ensuring the best use of resources. Then the second talks about respect for waste pickers and waste workers. This principle talks about just transition and how livelihood plans for waste pickers are a must in any intervention in the waste sector. The third principle is about enhancing inclusion and building from local knowledge. This principle talks about ensuring that all the interventions we're making are locally appropriate, something that is better achieved when local organizations and communities are involved in the decision-making process. Fourth principle is about responding to pollution and environmental harm with accountability, which is talking about what should not happen, and if it happened, what would need to be repaired with accountability. We want to move away from the bottom of the waste hierarchy as much as possible, and in particular, waste-to-energy incineration has proved to be especially problematic and something that our members have opposed strongly. Finally, support holistic solutions through system change. As an overarching principle, we need to ensure that our methane reduction agenda is aligned with other critical crises facing our global community, and we need to work in alliance, in diversity, cross-sectorally, and inclusively. So I've shared this very brief, express, one-on-one introduction to our principles, and it is amazing that today we have here all these speakers that will tell us about how these principles look like when you put them in practice. And in the first place, we will hear from Ana Rocha from Nipe Fagio in Tanzania, an organization implementing a groundbreaking zero waste model with a cooperative of waste pickers, expanding what's possible in Africa. Then we will hear also from David Sutasurya from YPPP in Indonesia, sharing insights about the political opportunities in this country and how the implementation of zero waste model in 9 cities could be expanded. We will also hear from Dr. Dominic Hawk, independent expert with consultancy firm Equanimator, participating here in our event on behalf of Zero Waste Europe, who will talk to us about what we do with residual waste once we have maximized all material recovery upstream solutions in the waste hierarchy. And so thank you so much for joining us again. And without further ado, I will give the floor to Anna.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk a little bit about the zero waste systems that we have been implemented in Dar es Salaam and in Zanzibar in Tanzania. It's also implemented in Arusha, and there are other cities coming, but I'll focus on Dar es Salaam and Zanzibar today. Nipe Fagio is a local organization, so we are talking about a national Tanzanian organization that has been for 10 years now promoting systemic change based on a 3-pillar strategy, which is basically data, policy, and action. So the zero waste system that we have is a cooperative-led model. That means that the cooperative is the heart of the system. It comes with the capacitation of people that usually don't have income opportunities and become cooperative members to be able to provide a service to the communities that these communities can benefit from. But they also provide education And they also provide a connection between the communities and the model that is being implemented. And that is in the context of Africa, and I think many of the global South countries, is fundamental for the success of the model. I wanted to start with some of the achievements because I think in many ways what people sometimes doubt that is possible is exactly, and I'll start with the 95% compliance to segregation at source, which is the one, the bottom in the middle. A lot of people believe that low-income communities in developing countries would never segregate waste at source. We have a 95% compliance to segregation at source. And the reason for that is because we are basically delivering a service that solves a problem that people recognize that they have. And they have been struggling with for a long time, but they don't actually have solutions for. And so by the moment that you actually deliver a solution, then people engage. And so being able to show the zero waste implementation as a solution is key for the success of the model. We actually are able to reduce between 75 and 85% of all the waste that is collected from the households from being taken to in the case of Dar es Salaam, we only have a dump site, we don't have a landfill. In the case of Arusha, we have a landfill. In the case of Zanzibar, we have a landfill. So we are able to actually manage locally between 75 and 85% of the waste. That means that that doesn't need to get into trucks. You don't need to have greenhouse gas emissions for that transportation. And that also means that all the organic waste, and together with the organic waste, all the methane, is being handled appropriately. We have a lot of people engaged. The model is actually, we are able to do all of that with less than 15% of what the government has projected as the needed budget to address a neighborhood. So it's actually very cheap to be implemented, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a great thing because it makes it very actionable. And it's a bad thing because when you are comparing this model with fancy solutions, people that like fancy solutions tend to go to what is expensive instead of going to what is cheap. But in terms of feasibility, we are talking about a huge feasibility for implementation. And this model, talking about environmental justice, actually in one neighborhood of Dar es Salaam, we have generated 33 times more jobs than the city of Dar es Salaam generates for the waste sector in Dar es Salaam exclusively. So brings a lot of opportunity for income generation in a country where people are struggling with income generation. So these are some of the pictures for you to see as oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. Here we go. So for you to see a little bit of, we have composting, we have black soldier flies at the local level, at the community level. We also deal with everything that can be recycled, so that's segregated and sold to recycling companies. And in the case of Dar es Salaam, and again, we're talking about sub-Saharan African context, we actually have organic waste composing about 80%, it's 79% of all the waste that we collect. So this is the case for one neighborhood of 2,800 houses, and the numbers are for that. So this is about 39 kilos of waste, 39 tons of waste a month that is being handled at the local level for 2,800 households. That's the composition that you can see, and that composition actually stays quite similar in different neighborhoods. So in terms of actually talking about the way that people love to talk about it, the low-hanging fruit and the feasibility of implementation. We are talking about a government that struggles to deliver waste collection services, having to choose between managing 38 tons at a day, in a month, or 168,000 tons together. So the decentralization of the waste management actually makes it manageable, especially for countries where the management of waste is such a challenge. It's much easier to manage 38 tons at a time than it is to manage 100 tons at a time in the context of Dar es Salaam specifically. And we have opportunities for scalability that are dying to have the implementation in their communities. We have done surveys, we have a lot going on there. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the projected impact, because when I come here and I talk about 39 tons a month for one neighborhood, people say, oh, that's so little. I'm talking about one of 565 neighborhoods town. So what I am talking about is not a small scale, it's a decentralized model. So it's about thinking how the decentralization that is efficient, that is effective, that delivers services to the communities that need those services, that actually address the greenhouse gas emissions that we are trying to address in methane, but in a way that is actually delivers environmental justice as part of that model, and that low-income countries are actually able to do it. So we are talking again, all these numbers are for one neighborhood out of 565 neighborhoods. So if we scale this, if we go, we can actually basically have much more emissions. We have actually the opportunity to have larger numbers just through a decentralized model. And Gaia has done a study, and one of the studies, and this is one of the cities that is as part of that study is Dar es Salaam, in which it was calculated that just the zero waste implementation in Dar es Salaam could reduce as much as 65% of the greenhouse gas emissions in a fairly simple way of implementation. To add to that, now we have Zanzibar as well, which is an archipelago that is part of Tanzania, and now is about to pledge to become the first zero waste archipelago in the world. So there is a whole implementation in that context as well that is going to add to these numbers that we have. We have 5 years of data on all the methane emissions that have been saved with zero waste implementation in Dar es Salaam, and we have longer data for other cities, and there is a lot of potential there. So with that, I wanted to say that if you want to know more, if you want to see some of what I am mentioning here, we are about to host the International Zero Waste Cities Conference in Tanzania in July, from the 2nd to the 5th of July, that there will be also a focused methane day at the end. And you are welcome to have discussions, to participate in panels, to talk with zero waste practitioners, to talk with the governments. Everyone is going to be there. And also to see with your own eyes the model that I am showing pictures of right here, and be able to see if that's real, not if I just have very good pictures. So you can come and watch and see. And as a bonus, if you come to Tanzania, you can also go and see some of the natural beauties that we have, and we have many. So that's me trying to convince you to come and visit, for actually a couple of reasons. One, because I think that it would be great to have people actually seeing and understanding how a decentralized model can deliver at the goals that we have in a different way, in embracing environmental justice, but also because for the communities of a country like Tanzania that are so isolated and that don't actually have that much attention, it's extremely important to have people to go there and see that they are doing a good job, and they are doing a great job. So they have been receiving a lot of people that go there to see the model, and it's extremely important for people there to be able to expand it further and to keep engaged. So karibuni Tanzania. And with that, I finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. David?
Okay, thank you, Mariel. Today I want to share about a new development in Indonesia. This is fresh because it's started in January this year. This is about the West Java Provincial Government, where my city is located, and now officially implement the organic waste disposal ban in Sarimukti landfill. This is the landfill near my city that's serving 2 cities and 2 municipalities. So in an area that we call in this presentation Bandung metropolitan area. So serving about 4 million people. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I forget to. Okay. So this policy is happened because or maybe initiated because or inflicted maybe because of a landfill fire that happened last August. That actually not only happened in this landfill, but happened in 38 other landfill in Indonesia. And the ban is only happen in this landfill, the organic waste ban. My presentation will try to explain why this only Sarimukti landfill in Bandung metropolitan area that the government have confidence to implement the organic waste ban to the landfill. So this policy has the potential from our calculation to divert 228,000 tons of organic waste per year from Bandung alone, from Bandung city alone, because this is where I have enough data, so I only calculate Bandung city alone, and that means we reduce 575 tons CO2 equivalent of methane emission per year from the landfill. This is equal to 75% of West Java province target of methane reduction from greenhouse gas emission from all the landfill in West Java, actually. And if we refer to the target national determined contribution, the enhanced national determined contribution that explained by our person from Ministry of Environment yesterday, it only already contributing from Bandung City alone 2% of the national from the waste sector. If this implementation can, this policy can be implemented effectively. And before I moving about talking about the why this region is ready to have more readiness to implement this policy compared to the other, I want to explain about what we are doing, and this is very important because this is setting the stage to the implementation of that policy. So since 2018, we start our zero cities project in Bandung, and this implementation of zero cities, the zero cities project means the implementation of zero waste in government waste management policy. So it's quite comprehensive. But now in my presentation, I will explain about one part of it that we choose to start with that because of our local condition. Because in Indonesia and maybe in other developing country, we still have problem on collection. For example, in Bandung metropolitan area, the coverage of collection is only 46%. And there is a huge gap between cities and municipalities, 60% gap. And if the waste is collected, is it mixed waste? So we cannot do anything except sending it to the landfill. And the problem is that I don't know in other developing countries, but in my countries, government don't do anything in collection at that time, and no knowledge about how collection will be done, could be done, and what kind of policy of collection that should be implemented by city government, for example. So we start by developing a model to show people and also to make us understand what kind of policy that could be implemented. So you can see in the picture, basically we adopt it from junk shop, people that collecting junk for selling. So we use push chart, and in the push chart we have containers specific for organic and specific for non-organic. So by this system, we have a way to monitor every house's compliance on segregation. That's why our Anna can calculate how much the rate of segregation also in our model. And this is very important for the implementation of law enforcement. So regulation should be based on this process. And then after the waste become collected, the organic waste, because it's already separated, can go directly to processing. So in our area, there is no always not going to the one site, but it's go to different sites. So organic waste can be processed directly, and we because it's already segregated at source, we say that this organic waste is food grade. That means we can process it and use it for urban farming. Is it safe for people? And it will improve local economy. It will improve local food security and improve citizen health. And this model currently already achieved in like Maria already said in 9 cities, and in total about 470,000 people the coverage. And I want to stress that this is the model, not the scale up. The model is what the means is to show and to research how the policy should be implemented. And the scale up is already happened because government already do by themselves, by their own budget, they cover 300,000 people. So, and that means this model alone can already divert organic waste 6,500 tons per year. So it's already contributing to the to methane reduction, methane emission reduction. So you can see that not only methane emission reduction in this slide that will be there are a lot of co-benefits. For example, we calculate how many jobs that also we calculate that the job is 2 times more than business as usual, for example, and higher than if we implement incinerator, for example. And also there are other benefits that also you can read on the slides. And then this slide try to show several factors that make this area has more readiness than the other area to implement the organic waste ban. The first is that we already start the process in 2013. So there is already deep engagement with stakeholders. And we start by organizing civil society, academic, consultant, and Bandung Zero, and into what we call Bandung Zero Waste Forum. And this long-term process is important because if there is a momentum, we already ready. So if we don't invest from 2013, when there is a landfill fire, we don't know what to do. So long-term investment is very important. And we are through the long-term process, we also already managed to produce a new waste management regulation in Bandung City and other city that the first in Indonesia that specifically regulates the segregated collection and regulates the decentralized organic waste management. And currently on progress, we are assisting provincial government to develop regulation and the implementation of the organic waste ban to landfill. So a lot of things still need to be done to implement this policy. And actually, not all is the good news, because actually there is still a challenge, because on the same time, the provincial government also plan to build incinerator. And this slide try to show the comparison between incinerator and the zero waste. For example, with incinerator, the city government will have to send 2,000 ton every day for the next 30 years. This is in the contract. So this is if we implement the organic waste ban, only 846 of residuals that need to be sent to landfill, and this is without considering the reduction of the plastic, for example. And as you know, incinerator is capital intensive. The price of tipping fee make a headache for local government. How they gonna pay that? Is it 30 more than 5 times than they currently have to pay? And it make them lost, don't have enough money, because it's already, if they've already pay for incinerator, they don't have money to implement in their own city, for example. And how they can implement zero waste if they have to pay for incinerator, for example. This is this conflicting policies still become a challenge in my area. So the last slide, this is just what is our recommendation to move forward. We already talked about how to scale up quickly, and I think we already learned from the sessions that we not only talk about technology, we talk about human and relationships, and this we have to take care more about this, working more about this. So the first tips is about the importance of working with local organization, because the local organization already do for a long time deep engagement with stakeholders, and this is a very precious asset, because if a big consultant come just try to do by themselves, at that time the relationship and the ownership of the cities and people is very low, and the sustainability will be questionable. And the next one is we need to invest in high impact organic waste investment based on organic waste hierarchy. I think our friends from German already say that, and we are aligned with that. And we need to avoid solution that will lock our local government for inflexible and intensive technology that provide a lot of greenhouse gas emission. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And Dr. Dominic Hock has the floor now.
All right. Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks again to the Global Methane Initiative for allowing me to come here and present to you this afternoon in almost the graveyard slot. But hopefully David's given a pretty good segue into some of the things I want to talk about today. I'm going to talk about dealing with leftover mixed waste. And just to explain, for those who I don't know in the room, and of whom there are plenty, I'm not somebody who thinks that the problems of the world get solved at the bottom of the waste hierarchy. Quite the opposite. And as some in the room know, Charlotte, for example, we've been very keen enthusiasts in trying to design and optimize waste collection systems for local government, municipalities, and to enhance our capture of those materials. But what I want to talk about today is that sort of leftover mixed waste, as we call it. And just in terms of terminology, by leftover mixed waste, what I mean is after people have engaged with source separation systems, what is then left over and what might subsequently be being dealt with through either, as David was saying, incineration. Lots of also co-incineration emerging in various countries in Asia, for example. And what should we do with that? And that's been a question that's preoccupied me for most of my professional career, because I always want to get further. I always want to do more in terms of source separation. But so far, there still is always something left. But it's a diminishing amount. And my professional history, I could point to countless individuals who have sworn blind 10 years ago that the most you could ever recycle was X%, and now we're doing 2X%. And that will go on in the future. It will go on as we start to get to grips with things better. And so one of the points that David was making there about the difference between incineration type solutions, which we would call, for want of a better term, throughput facilities. They sort of demand a constant throughput, and the people who want to bank them look to get a sort of effectively a constant flow of material so that they get a counterpart revenue from the municipality to pay off the capital and also a little bit of profit. So they will look for that locking in of a certain amount of waste. And certainly in my country, if you went to a bank, you'd typically want to make sure that you had a pretty clear view as to at least 70% or so of the capacity of your facility if you wanted to get a loan from a bank. They just wouldn't give you the money otherwise. So we're in this context here. We've got huge amounts of waste. In my view, we've talked about how much methane there is coming off landfills. Part of the problem is we don't even know how much waste we're generating. And I mean that very, very clearly. And I can say that very confidently about my own country, the United Kingdom. We do not know how much waste is generated by commerce and industry. We do not know how that is being managed. We should be honest about this. We just don't know. People lose interest in the stuff that we use day in, day out to make stuff, use stuff, throw away. They lose interest in it once it is discarded, and it becomes, in terms of international definitions, waste. So for the foreseeable future, though, we're going to have this problem of having to deal with the stuff that's left over. Now, in this conference, there will be people who are going to tell me that methane, because we're all here talking about methane, is 80 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. But that's because they want to use a GWP 20-year lifetime view, as it were, of the molecule, instead of what's currently happening as nations report to the United Nations Framework Convention using the 100-year GWP, which assigns methane roughly a third of the strength that we would say it should be given over a 20-year lifetime. But the whole point for me, I can't understand why we're talking about global warming potential unless we really have to. Because aren't we trying to constrain global temperatures below a certain level? In which case, if I'm not in a circumstance where I have to convert the impact of methane into the equivalent impact of carbon dioxide, then why would I even try to equate the effects of a gas whose lifetime, carbon dioxide, is many hundreds of years in the atmosphere, with one which has a much shorter lifetime? Why don't I just focus on the impact on temperature change? Because then I don't have to convert from one gas's impact to another. I can just try to understand what is the impact of what I'm doing on global temperature change. And if I do that, then what I ought to be trying to do in terms of managing waste or doing anything else, agriculture, wastewater treatment, I think I should be focusing on trying to minimize my maximum contribution to global temperature. The point at which I get to that maximum contribution of my activity to global temperature is equivalent to net zero, because we're on the down. We're on the down from there on. So what I'm going to do is present to you now the impact of landfilling 1 ton of waste and compare it with the impact of incinerating 1 ton of waste. And on the y-axis, what you're going to see is not CO2 equivalents, it's the contribution to temperature change. And this is 1 ton of waste, and this is what it looks like over time. So I know, here it is. And this, my landfill captures no methane. And here's what it looks like. Here's why we're all interested in methane, because it's got this impact on global temperature. It's far worse in the short term than incinerating. But notice something, you know, short term dominated by methane. In the long term, everything's dominated by CO2 because CO2 hangs around in the atmosphere longer. So funny enough, in the long term, it's almost always the case that the incinerator will be worse than the landfill because the incinerator liberates all the fossil CO2 as well as the non-fossil CO2. And this graphic shows all of the contributions, including the non-fossil CO2. Let's see what happens when we increase the gas capture. So this is when I go to 20% gas capture. And let's, you know, the peakiness of the methane emissions drops. And then I go to 70% gas capture, which some countries have, and the UK historically felt that we could do 70% gas capture. We've actually revised that view because we realized that the half-life of decay of many of the fractions of what was going into landfills was shorter than we thought it was. And we were actually overestimating the capture. And so our average UK capture on modern landfills with good gas collection now, we estimate to be, the UK government estimates to be 52%. So this is at 70%. And at some point, I get to a point where if I capture enough of the methane, actually, the contribution of my landfill to global temperature change is less in every year than that of the incinerator. So what does this tell us? What we sort of already knew, that methane's peaky, it's a problem. It also tells us why facilities with low gas capture, we might want to get those gas captures as high as we can get them, because otherwise we're contributing in the short term to this really peak impact on. What we'd do is we'd delete it altogether. We'd try and get rid of it as far as possible. And basically what we'd be doing then was we'd be saying, well, let's just try and not generate any methane at all. Because if I can only capture 52% of it in well-operating landfills in a country that's been doing it for ages and ages and ages, I'm not saying people can't do a lot better than that, but getting to 80% everywhere on the planet is going to be quite difficult. So, other things being equal, gas capture helps. But landfills, they're not so easy to manage. So how far are we going to get? So should we, this is interesting, question for David, should we really, you know, lots of places would say, well, let's ban biodegradable waste then. And lots of countries have done that in the EU, for example, and they've done it in different ways. And some of them have gone for what we call a loss in ignition method or total organic carbon method. And what that effectively does, it says, well, if you've got municipal type waste, then forget landfilling it. And what that means is you policy environment where the authorities say, well, incinerate it. This is an issue if you're doing that at a particular point in time where your source separation systems haven't developed to anything like where they could get to. You're getting locked into where you are. So what about biologically treating the waste? And Anya's presentation this morning in the German session was almost like a segue for me as well into this discussion. So the other way of banning organic material from landfill is saying, right, not so much that we'll ban the stuff going into landfill, but we'll ban the stuff going into landfill if it hasn't been treated in such a way that it's less likely to generate methane when it gets into the landfill. And that's what's happened in Germany, and it's happened in Austria, and it's happened in other countries besides. And so the other thing that's happened in the meantime as well, though, is we've ended up with the ability through, depending on the exact composition of your waste, the ability to take out particularly plastics from waste that is left over after people have had a go at source separation. Now, that depends on the collection system you're using. Is it a twin stream collection? Is it a three stream collection? But what this approach, if I take mixed waste, I can have a second to try and get the recyclable stuff out. Plastics being one of the targets here. In the EU, the view from other countries may think we're not brilliant at recycling plastics. You know, there's a lot that's still left in the leftover mixed waste, and the modern sorting systems can get out of that stream of the order 70 to 80% of the plastics. And that's relevant whether you're a landfill or an incinerator, because if you're an incinerator, it means you're taking out the source of the fossil CO2 that otherwise goes up the stack in the incineration plant. And it's one of the reasons why jurisdictions like Oslo, Copenhagen, who are serious about trying to get their CO2 emissions down as municipalities, are looking at using these sorts of sorting facility to take out the source of the fossil CO2 emissions in the plant. And after you've gone through that, you've got a relatively, you've still got enough biodegradable material in the what we would then call the residual waste to stabilize it biologically. And what I mean by that is taking it through a process akin to, you can incorporate step as well and generate some energy. That does add, I would argue, some complications that might make them might make it worth ignoring for the purposes of these facilities in many situations. Now, in a conventional LCA analysis, what I'll have done by doing that is I'll have knocked out a ton of CO2 for every ton of waste that would otherwise go untreated to the landfill. If, on the other hand, I look at it in my temperature graphic, this is what happens. And I'm comparing here three lines. The peaky one is with a UK type landfill, 50% gas capture. The second one down is the incinerator. And the third one down is my MRBT system. I've got rid of the peak. I've got rid of the peak. I'm not generating so much methane. It's not zero, but I'm not generating anything like as much methane. And so in the short and the long term, I am not making a massive contribution to temperature change. So, and by the way, I did actually do some recycling of plastic. So if I really put that in, I'd flatten up further, because there's about depending on the waste composition, this was done with there's no such thing as a typical waste composition. Shut up, Dominic. So, but you can get something of the order 200 kilograms in terms of the avoided emissions associated with using the secondary material as opposed to the primary. So to finish up, I think, sorry, I don't know how to go back. There you go. Yeah. So just to finish up, we can't globally, we cannot do the irresponsible thing anymore and just chuck stuff away in dumps and landfills. We can't do it. If anyone, any country is thinking about building loads of incineration plants, just be aware of the fact that you are sending quite a lot of fossil CO2 up the stack. And so that is not going to go away. And that is a contribution you will not get in the long term from a biological based solution. So maybe opt for something that looks more like this sort of what we call MRBT solution, mechanical recycling and biological treatment solution. It gives us some further sorting. We get biological stabilization of the residual. You can, suitable regulation, do what they do in Austria, for example, and put the organic matter on eroded, use it in restricted applications where you've got a need for organic matter. But there's some justice issues here, I think, also. The biological treatment, the composting type approach, it's more familiar to many people around the world who do it in their gardens. It can be designed to be more flexible. In Italy, for example, and in Germany, you had some sites that were operated as what we used to call double duty sites. And so you'd have lines of aerobic treatment which were progressively switched over from treating residual waste to treating source segregated organic material through effectively the same process. So you can flexibly improve what you're doing in your waste collection system. You know, you don't lock in for that reason at low recycling rates if you're trying to solve your methane problem just by switching into an incineration plant. The process itself, you can see that if you've got a sort of sorting plant at the front end as well, you've got more opportunity. I'm not saying no one loses a job who's currently sorting waste on the landfill site, but equally, I'm not sure we can sensibly suggest that we should allow that system to go on forever, where everyone is separating waste at a site for untreated waste. The capital commitment is far lower for the whole system than it is for an incineration plant. It makes landfills easier to manage generally. There are some issues still, and there's some discussions about, for example, trade-offs between methane and nitrous oxide, which is an important point, particularly in the time when you place the biologically pre-treated waste into the landfill. So that's an issue to be considered. But really importantly for global justice as well, and I really like the presentation in the plenary yesterday from the lady from the World Meteorological Organization. Let's face it, the fundamental issue of environmental justice here is how are we going to keep global temperatures down? And the more we can do that, the less likely we are going to have an impact on huge numbers of people across the world who are going to be threatened by various consequences of global temperatures rising well above where we're hoping they should. And so I hope I've given you some thought as to not just how we might think about these solutions, but what might be an interesting approach to dealing with waste in certain circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dominic. And yes, I hope, and well, I believe that this panel has really given you a very comprehensive overview of environmental justice principles and practicalities and how these zero waste models are being implemented, and even furthermore, like what could be after the implementation of a zero waste model, what could be some implementation of residual waste treatment. And I want to have some time for discussions from the audience. I think we have until 4:20, right? So we have some time. I do want to start with throwing a question to the panel, and I have to say that in the end we have some closing remarks from Nicolas Diaz, and I'm going to keep the time to make sure that Nicolas can share his views with us. So I think that now we are definitely like all thinking like finance is a big element in this puzzle, because we are seeing how this implementation is happening. We're all excited to scale it up. We're all seeing the opportunity, and yet we all facing financial barriers. So this is the question that I have for you guys, and starting with Anna, just give me like a minute answer if you can. Like, what are the main financial barriers to access the resources that we need for scaling up the zero waste models? How do you think that we could overcome these financial barriers? If you can share your insights.
That's a great question. I think when I think about financial barriers, I think what I would first speak about is certainty that you have long-term funding. So when you think about the scalability of the model, and when you think about working with people and making sure that we can deliver all the results that we all want to see, we need to make sure that we are committed in the long term. So now, as I mentioned in the beginning, several times when you introduce to people a model that is not fancy, it doesn't need all this financial investment, doesn't need all this money. People tend to also not take that model into consideration as a solution that can be attractive to investors, because investors several times want to have more attractive, fancier solutions. So what we need to be able to expand the implementation is actually making sure that you have access to funding that is long term, that allows us to work with the communities and achieve the results and scale at a pace that people can embrace and can contribute to in the long term. It gets very hard when you have funding for 1 year and then you don't know if you have that fund renewed for the second year. So if we have a commitment in funding that is long term, then we are able to scale at a much faster pace, and we are able to pair that scalability with policy. Because the other portion that is very important for the zero waste implementation, which relates in many ways to methane emissions reduction, is the fact that we need national policies in countries that are going to enable that to also scale at a certain pace. And so if you can prove that you have a model, that model is financed and can be financed in the long term, then you have enough time to work with the policymakers on developing the right policies to allow that to happen. If you combine these two things, we solved the problem, we can all go home, or you can come to Tanzania and have fun with us seeing the giraffes and the elephants, but we don't need to actually spend all our energy trying to discuss other kinds of solutions. So policy and funding together, for me, it's the solution for this.
Yeah. I will share what from the countries and what we are trying to do. Yeah, after maybe nearly 7-8 years working in with local government, we were is in central government. So now YPBB and other organization in Alliance for Zero Waste Indonesia start to campaign for changing the policy of institution and financings, because we at the end understand that political decision, people say finance politics, this is very important to make sure that we have enough funding. So because if we see the size of budget of my country and the cities, actually we can pay. So we have enough money to pay, because if we want to, the problem of the waste management is not investment, actually operational costs. Operational cost is the issue, and the only way that a system that can be funded sustainably is by using public funding. So this is why we are now focusing to advocate for changing the policy of financing and institutions. This is both policy is very much related. Maybe we can discuss later why, but basically this is it. And the second thing is the available money is used wrongly. Is used wrongly because of addiction of a technofix. This is what happened in my country. My country is changing from one technology to this other technology, and the other technology, like people changing wife or husband for a long time. So this is not sustainable and wasting a lot of money. We have a lot of infrastructure that idle because the technology is not working, or they too expensive, for example. So this is what happened, and we need to change it. That's why we try to promote that we implement consistent long-term zero waste system, because if we implement it for the first time, we already achieved 100% of segregation and collection now. So because we have the money, so this is the challenge. Of course, we need change of mindsets, but we try to do that by promoting new scenarios of waste management. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more with that. That one of the problems is that there's too much of a focus on investment and capital financing and too little on revenue financing, when generally you will not have good waste management systems without good waste collection systems. And in the vast majority of countries, the waste collection function resides with local government. So fundamentally, the fact that there might be anywhere between 2 and 4 billion people on the planet with no waste collection service is a public finance problem. It's how do I get revenue money to support the payment for those services? And I think my instinct is that if there is, I'm really surprised that I've never actually seen from any of the donor organizations. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It might exist out there, but I've never seen a clear route for somebody who has no waste management services to how they're going to fund it. And what's quite interesting at the moment, and you have in parallel to people's concerns about methane, you have a UN negotiations on a plastics treaty, and people are talking about, well, we want to implement extended producer responsibility. David's country's introduced extended producer responsibility for packaging, but it's not going to get any money back into the collection service from the producers. Now that seems to me to be an enormous gaffe. And the same is true, by the way, of India and the Philippines and Vietnam. Well, Vietnam, it might work, but we're missing a trick here, because we need to get revenue funding in to support the service. And so there are some aspects of a service that can be covered by producers, but organic waste is really difficult. Who was the private entity who was responsible for the wasted food? Whose product was that? And so that's the part that is going to have to be funded by things other than producer responsibility finance. It's going to have to come from either mayors raising fees from residents and businesses, or it's going to have to come from somebody supporting it through some other means, maybe donor finance. But fundamentally, this is going to be a revenue problem, not a capital problem. If the revenue is there to provide the counterpart payments to somebody who invests in a facility and gives them the confidence that they can do that, that's going to unlock what should happen. And for that reason, there'll be some less creditworthy countries in the world who people will cast doubt on. And I think that's where things like investment guarantees should play a role on bilateral or multilateral basis.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for this. We have maybe 5 minutes that I'd like to open it to the audience. If there's any questions that want to be raised, and maybe we take a couple, I don't know if as a reaction to everything that's been said. And please, Charlotte, I see Charlotte, I see Dr. Chapra as well. We can take a couple, and then I think we'll take a couple, and then I'll give you, and then we'll answer here.
I love the focus on the point about we need to think about the impact on heat, temperature rise, rather than carbon or methane. So there's a huge amount of work currently going on to price carbon methane certificates. Productive.
Is
it going to be counterproductive?
I'm Dr. Nupur Bahadur, Delhi. My question to the audience is that since we are very new in this area in India, so how, if we plan to have a joint project or something, so how we can have emission detection or monitoring in the landfill, and how do you do in the sewage treatment facility? I just wanted to have some idea on the monitoring aspect and analysis aspect in these two sectors.
Anyone else?
On the first question, then, is it productive? It's probably the answer. There obviously very live discussion, for example, trading schemes about methane alongside CO2. How are we going to include other gases as well, and on what basis should we do that? And I think that's a really relevant question, but it's being considered long and hard. Yes, precisely why it's difficult. It might well be the case that you just separate schemes and you have one for methane, one for CO2, and you almost try to disentangle the sort of need, drive some sort of equivalence between the two, because it's that equivalent, just not equivalent. So why do we pretend that they are? These gases play different roles. They're only equivalent to the extent that they both contribute to global temperature increase. They have a radiative. For example, why don't we have emissions credits then for sulfur dioxide and the fact that it actually masks global temperature rise? So, you know, you have aerosols that are basically, getting in the way. So you can go on with this, but I some separated to almost diffuse that, and the alternative is to go with a tax and try and tax the emissions. But then you enter the second question, which is, well, how are you going to measure it? And I'm probably I'm definitely the wrong person to ask that question to, because I'm not an expert on all the measurement techniques. All I would say though is that in terms of what we've tried to do, or what policy has tried to do in the EU in terms of trying to stop methane, is they've generally sought to ensure that the facilities would make sure that the waste was below a certain respirometric fermentability threshold. And so in the German case, it's what's called AT4. It's the amount of gas that's generated over 4 days, 96, and it's 5 milligrams of oxygen per gram of dry matter. And that's a standardized test, and there are different techniques for doing that test, and people argue about which is the best one. But that's a way of trying to prevent those emissions from happening.
Okay. And then we'll have to move on to the closing remarks. Thank you.
Right. So first, a comment on the metrics that we use to impact in terms of global warming from not only the greenhouse gases. There, of course, we use the global warming potential, and there are also new metrics. Actually, they're not so new. Maybe it's those that you talk about where we measure things in terms of contribution to temperature change. But we actually also have metrics. The radiative forcing concept is the metric that we can also aggregate all other kind of impact, adding to climate change, or what your contribution from aerosols and land use change and all these. And then I would just say, stick to the metrics, because if we open up for new ways of accounting these things, it's going to cause a lot of confusion. That's just my personal opinion. We have metrics now, let's stick to them. Of course, I think everyone in here now is that the global warming potentials, they come with a time horizon, and that's what you talked about. So it's just a small prayer, because it's confusing enough. So I actually think we do have globally accepted and defined by the IPCC and numbers that we can trust and use. Then I have a question. Yeah, but it's also for you, Dominic. And when you do these kind of assessment, especially if you move to LCA, the LCA concept, it's difficult. It's easy to get lost. So I just at all did not follow the comparison between landfilling and incineration, and I think I disagree on the numbers. And one reason may be that you do not include a saving from the energy that you generate when you do incineration. And that is just very important. Of course, you can waste the energy, but nobody would put up an incinerator and just waste the energy. Maybe they will waste the heat, but not the electricity. So that's just a comment to that. I think it's, I don't know if it was just me. I found a little bit mixed message here. Yeah, but of Denmark, yes, as Germany, but maybe with more incineration in our system as as a way out land. And of course, nowadays we don't want to incinerate everything.
Sure.
So we're also starting to have. I think I have. Do we have 7-9 bins at home where we sort out? So definitely incinerators are now asking for more things to incinerate. Is that a good thing? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah. So
just very quickly, because I know we're running out of time. But so the first response in terms of the metrics, I looked at radiative forcing over time as well. But of course, I chose temperature because that's what seems to be orienting the whole of the global discussion. Now, to the extent that's the case, GWP 100 is highly misleading. It's not just slightly misleading, it's actually highly misleading. So I get the point that it would disrupt everything, but I'm afraid in a slightly cynical way, I take the view we're still in the foothills, frankly, of dealing with the problem of global climate change. So let's change it now before we make any further, slightly erroneous decisions based on the existing metrics because we think it's too complicated to do anything else. But that's a personal view. I completely accept that it's disruptive. The second point, though, on the avoided energy, you're right. I didn't include it, but I didn't include it for landfill either. But of course, it's much more. But bear in mind that, for example, I know you have many heat generating facilities in Denmark, but a lot of them are power only. In the future, as we say, in Indonesia, it's probably, I doubt if it's going to be a district heat. But for a power generating facility at the moment in the UK, for example, we have an average carbon intensity of our production today. It's 100 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. On average, an incinerator might get me 700 kilowatt hours per ton of the UK type waste. So that means that at most, I'm going to offset at the moment 100 kilograms of CO2. That's basically about 1/10 that line for the incinerator there. So you're going to drop it a small amount, but not much. And if we're serious about decarbonizing power, the amount by which you're going to drop it is going to get less and less and less over time. So, and I think it's important here. We in the EU made a clear view in waste law that I say we're no longer in it in the UK. So the UK made a clear decision to prefer incineration relative to landfill. It did that at a time when it was reasonable to assume that a lot of electricity generated by an incinerator would displace coal. 700 kilowatt hours multiplied by 900 grams of CO2 is basically, do the math, 630. It offsets the 500 or so kilograms of CO2 for each ton of waste. So you were claiming to be everyone was claiming to be sort of negative impact. It's not true anymore. We need to update our thinking, in my view.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all your questions. Let's continue talking in the coffee break. I really want to give the floor to Nicolás Diaz, the manager of the program on circular economy and waste in the Global Methane Hub, for closing remarks, and really looking forward to your views on this. Nicolás, the floor is yours.
Oh, yes, of course. Super interesting conversation, though. I think we are going to have more than 1 hour at the end, like to wrap up. So probably the data and the metrics are going to come back again. And I think it's a necessary discussion, of course, because you need to simplify, to work and agree on what the actions are, but also you need the necessary complexity of global systems and global warming as a complete topic to research on. Yeah, I'm representing the Global Methane Hub here. Sorry. Um, and for those who don't know us, we are supporting this forum with the coffee and the receptions, but we do more than that. I hope you enjoy that. Uh, I think we are the main philanthropic effort focusing on tackling down methane emissions globally. We work on the most in the sectors that are generating most of the emissions, so energy, waste, and agriculture. I mean, I'm part of the waste program. And I think in the waste sector, it is very clearly demonstrated the importance of working with a development lens and with a justice-centered approach. I think it's the topic of this discussion in the sense that first, vulnerable communities and historically displaced communities are the most impacted by climate change. So starting with that, I think it's a first recognition. And in the case of methane, they are those who are also overcoming the worst cost of our model of development and our model of production. So mostly affected by landfills. And when we talk about solutions, we have like short-term solutions by addressing methane, and also from a development lens, we also can have like big benefits for those communities in terms of reducing the amount of waste going to final disposal, and also creating green jobs and local growth by supporting what the higher priority management options and what the waste reduction options are. So it has that like double impact. And I wanted to recall what our history, short history with Gaia is in terms of that we are a very young organization. I think we turned 2, so we are kind of a toddler. We are starting to do our first steps and learning in the process. And several organizations have taking our hands and help it with understanding what the landscape is in terms of the diagnostic and also the opportunities. And in the case of waste, obviously we started with a very strong like recognition of how pivotal environmental justice was. That's why I started with the talk about like the vulnerable communities. But thinking wrongly about how to approach to it. So as the recipients of our efforts and as beneficiaries of the impact that we can leverage. Of course they are. But as we have seen here, there's a lot of local knowledge and capital, human capital out there that's not being recognized when you approach to this with a lens of global north solutions. So we think about like big capital and investment solutions that probably are going to be needed in many places. But if you don't reconcile that with what you can generate from the what's on the ground, you are missing a huge opportunity. We have been talking about innovative approaches to financing, innovative approaches to data collection, and we have here in this presentation that data collection can be done through communities. That the business models are working, they are effective, and that's a huge lost opportunity if we are failing to like engage with these communities, especially because they are also part of those who are making the decisions to try to benefit them. So they are also citizens of local governments that are like a central stakeholder when we talk about waste. So I think it is an invitation to keep learning, to keep listening to those who are like directly impacted by what we are trying to do in here, but also those who are carrying out the most innovative and many times effective actions to tackle down those methane emissions coming from the waste sector. So yeah, we are going to eagerly continue to work with Gaia in this learning curve. We're starting to run because we don't have time, and yeah, I think that's an invitation for everyone to engage in these conversations and keep thinking broadly on how we deal with climate change from this sector. Thank you.